Hello, my name is T-Rex. I did a master's degree in environmental studies, sustainable development, and climate change through Peace Corps Masters International. So I was living in Paraguay for 2.5 years doing a ecosystem service valuation research and working with the local community to understand the importance of the ecosystem that is surrounding them. I was working in the Paraguayan context to get smallhold farmers paid through the carbon credit market so that they could preserve the trees that were on their property and not have to cut them down for providing a livelihood to their families. By the end of that experience, I had gotten in trouble of trying to get smallhold farmers paid through the government carbon credit program and returned back to the States a little disheartened with the state of the current carbon markets, seeing that a lot of the capital that was meant for the farmers was actually getting pocketed by other individuals. So I returned with a mission to really change the way we're perceiving our natural assets and the benefits from them. And one of the initial frameworks that I really put out was around how the world around us affects our health and well-being as a population. And during that, ended up getting international recognition for the methodology that was developed. And at the same time, I was practicing with cryptocurrency and Web3 and seeing this entire regenerative finance movement. So it combined the interests, and in December of 2021 or something like that, whenever ETH Denver is, I ended up going there and meeting Sam, the founder of TDF, and was really inspired by that story and other individuals within the refi space to come to the point where I am now, where I've been able to connect with Sam over numerous occasions on international calls and really talk about how we can improve the health and well-being of our reality into the coming years. So yeah, that's why I'm here today at TDF after 2.5 years of exploring and trying to really create analysis methodologies that portray how important the world around us is to us. So in our reality, we have renewable resources, and renewable resources are things like trees and plants, the flora and fauna that are around us. These things, once they're used for their resources, if they're harvested at a sustainable or regenerative rate, then we're going to be able to continue to use them into the future. And there's no set expiration date as to how much resources we could potentially use if we're in a relationship of sustainability and regeneration with the world around us. Non-renewable resources, however, are things like the rocks that are in the ground and the components that make up soil, because these resources take such a long time to formulate and to come into existence that if we don't function under the timescales that are allowing us to really have a sustainable or regenerative relationship with them. So we really need to be very conscious as to the utilization of it. And both the relationship of renewable and non-renewable resources come together to formulate our reality and our world. So TDF here, we have a beautiful forest of oaks and agroforestry system. And the resources that are going to be provided by this agroforestry system and the oaks are going to be able to continue to support us into the future. And in terms of the non-renewable resources that TDF has, there's only a limited amount of ground and soil that we're able to support these systems into functioning and well-being. So with TDF conserving 50% of the natural space that's on their property and making it to where it's able to rewild, this has an effect on the microclimate of the area. And it's able to create different levels of precipitation than what would occur in a desertified area, an area that's not taken care of. So this increases the resilience and well-being of the population that inhabits Abella and the TDF area, because they're able to benefit from the increased precipitation that's going on. And when we have these plants putting their roots into the soil, the roots are retaining the soil, and they develop relationships with bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi. And the relationships that they develop help to increase the quality of the soil that they're benefiting from, because the mycorrhizal fungi and the bacteria are able to help the trees sequester nitrogen right from the air into the soil. That will benefit not only the tree, but other plants around that tree. And when there is an increase in the water, air, and soil, we're going to have an increase in the biodiversity that's able to be present in an area. So oftentimes when you're staying at TDF, you're hearing the sounds of birds throughout the day, but especially in the golden hours of the morning and the evenings. And it's a really beautiful way to be in relationship with the world around us, because these birds are going to drop fertilizers into the trees of their poop. And with this poop and with the bacteria that's there, it's going to increase the ability for other things to benefit from it. So often when you're digging in the soil here at TDF, you find earthworms and little centipedes and millipedes, and all of these insects are also creating an ecosystem of itself where it's related to the greater and wider ecosystem. So we're able to see these levels of biodiversity. And biodiversity, the increase of all this flora and fauna, leads to an increase in the carbon mass. And I initially started talking in this talk around carbon markets. The carbon markets are one of the most developed ecosystem service marketplaces in this point in time. So what carbon markets are doing is saying that there has been a reduction or mitigation of carbon being released into the air. So, for example, the trees that are on this property, when they're growing, we just planted, for example, an 1,000 tree plot on the TDF property. And as these trees grow, the biomass increases. And as the biomass increases, more and more carbon is sequestered into these trees. And companies that are really impacting the environment but want to try and offset the level of impact that they're having are one of the purchasers of these carbon credits. So they're saying, we realize that we're continuing to emit carbon into the atmosphere, and we realize that carbon, when it's emitted into the atmosphere, has an effect on greenhouse gases and climate change, as it is a greenhouse gas, warming up our atmosphere. And time again, scientists have told us that we need to change our business practices to not do this. But the economic system at this point in time has made it to where we think it's reasonable that we just continue our business as usual practices. But what we can do is we'll channel funding to projects that are changing the world, that are having an impact on regenerating it by growing trees, by increasing the biodiversity, and really creating a greater sense of resilience and well-being within the context that these projects are being carried out in. So carbon markets are just the first example of many different examples that I think we're going to see into the future of ecosystem services marketplace. So we'll likely see water markets where industries that are contaminating water are paying for water credits so that they can offset their impact, and other projects are able to increase the level of quality and quantity of water that we have. Same with soil, same with biodiversity. And one of the very important ecosystem services that we need to really understand, and it's often one of the hardest to measure, is the relationship that the world around us has on us culturally and spiritually. And this could potentially be an ecosystem service credit, but that in itself is going to open up a wormhole if we only focus on the cultural and spiritual side of what benefits we're having from these ecosystems, because all of these ecosystem service benefits are interconnected with each other. Like I mentioned with this example, when we have this little sapling and it's growing, it's increasing the carbon mass that it has. It's also going to have a greater and greater effect on the microclimate of the region and the water retention rates of that region, as well as the soil retention rates. So we need to start looking into a holistic perspective on the world around us, especially in terms of ecosystem services. There's different frameworks that are being applied when we're looking into these ecosystem services and the impacts, the positive impacts that we're having into the world around us. A lot of people have heard about the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, but oftentimes, myself included, I cannot remember the 17 principles or goals that make up the Sustainable Development Goals. So what a nonprofit organization out of California has done has created a framework that is like, what we really need to focus on is soil, water, air, carbon, biodiversity, and equity. And with these 6, we'll have a more holistic picture of the world around us. And here, during my stay in the traditional Dream Factory, we've created one of the first ecological benefit frameworks for the hypercerts and the Web3 space. So if you want to learn more about it, please feel free to look into the materials at the traditional Dream Factory